By the time people start begging, the decision has already been buried. That line isn't dramatic, it's procedural. It's what happens when someone moves early, thinks quietly, and finishes long before the crowd realizes there was even a race. What you're about to hear isn't a warning story. It's a post-warning story, the kind where panic shows up late, advice arrives breathless, and urgency pretends it was always here. And yet, he just smiles. Not because he's cruel, not because he's arrogant, but because the moment for permission expired without notice. Here's a fact most people never talk about. In high-stakes decisions, over 80% of objections don't appear at the beginning. They appear near the end. Not because people suddenly care, but because they suddenly realize they can't stop what's already in motion. That's when voices rise. That's when hands reach out. That's when warnings get emotional, dramatic, and very concerned for your own good. It looks like wisdom. It's actually delay trying to catch up. This is the strange part no one prepares you for. Calm is often mistaken for ignorance. When someone isn't panicking, observers assume they don't understand the risk. In reality, it usually means they understood it early enough to make peace with it. That's why the begging feels sincere, but ineffective. The argument is arriving after the conclusion. And yes, there's a touch of humor in all this, because nothing is more awkward than people urgently explaining consequences to someone who already accepted them months ago. It's like frantically reminding a pilot about gravity after the plane has landed. Admirable concern, terrible timing. This isn't about recklessness. It's about sequence. It's about how decisions are actually made versus how they're publicly reacted to. And once you see that difference clearly, you'll understand why the smile wasn't disrespectful. It was simply the sound of a door closing softly while everyone else was still knocking. Number one, he already studied the consequences and accepted them. Most people don't fear action. They fear responsibility for what comes after. That's where hesitation lives. They delay, debate, gather opinions, and secretly hope someone else will absorb the fallout. But he did the opposite. He sat with the consequences early, before emotions got loud, before outside voices arrived, before panic could dress itself up as wisdom. He didn't rush past the risks or pretend they weren't real. He examined them, stripped them of drama, and asked one quiet question. Can I live with this if it goes wrong? Once that answer became yes, the decision was already finished. This is why warnings bounce off him. Warnings work on people who are still bargaining with outcomes. What if this happens? What if you regret it? Those questions only shake someone who hasn't fully paid the mental price yet. He already did. The cost was calculated, accepted, and emotionally settled. There's nothing left for fear to negotiate with. What outsiders mistake for confidence is actually closure. He closed the emotional loop early. While others are still discovering risks in real time, he processed them long ago. That's why urgency feels irrelevant to him. Urgency assumes the future hasn't been considered. In his case, it has, thoroughly, honestly, and without fantasy. There's also a harsh truth here that makes people uncomfortable. Once someone accepts consequences, they become hard to control. Fear loses its leverage. Guilt loses its grip. Even concern starts to sound repetitive. You can't scare someone who already knows exactly what they're risking and decided it was worth it. This doesn't make him reckless. Reckless people ignore consequences. He respected them enough to face them early. That's the difference. He didn't outsource his thinking to opinions or hope things would magically work out. He chose his burden on purpose. So, when people beg, plead, or rush in with last-minute clarity, they're speaking to a version of him that no longer exists. They're addressing uncertainty, but he's standing on acceptance, and once acceptance is reached, the decision doesn't need defending. It doesn't need noise. It doesn't even need urgency. It just moves forward, quietly, calmly and far beyond the reach of late warnings. Number 2. He stopped believing that being understood was necessary. Most people live in a constant state of explanation, trying to make their choices palatable, their thoughts digestible, and their actions approved. They feel the pressure to justify, to translate their intentions into words that satisfy everyone around them. But he didn't play that game. At some point, he realized that the need to be understood is a leash disguised as concern. It tugs at you, slows you down, and gives power to voices that don't actually matter. Once he let go of that need, the world's noise lost its hold on him. Begging, persuading, or warning had no pull because he never needed their permission to begin with. This is where most people miss the point. Understanding is not always a gift you receive. Sometimes it's a demand you mistakenly place on yourself. He stopped seeking it, and in that freedom, his choices became sharper, cleaner, and more unstoppable. He could move without hesitation because he wasn't measuring his actions against others' expectations. When people finally realize what he's doing, their panic and insistence arrive too late, and he knows it. Their comprehension is irrelevant, and he treats it as such. He doesn't ignore people out of arrogance. He simply understands that timing and action are more important than approval. Waiting to be understood is a trap that turns clarity into paralysis. Most warnings are desperate attempts to wrest control, to convince someone they are wrong before the moment slips away. He has no interest in wrestling over opinion. He's already past the point where debate has meaning. There's a quiet power in moving beyond the need for understanding. It's not loud, it's not flashy, but it's utterly unshakable. People may shout, argue, and gesture wildly, but none of it reaches him because he isn't anchored to their perception. Their words are echoes against a mind that no longer requires validation. By shedding the need to be understood, he occupies a space where others can't touch him, no matter how fervently they try. And that's why when the world begs for attention, he can smile, unbothered, untouchable, and already long past their reach. Number 3. His decisions were made quietly long before anyone noticed. What looks sudden to everyone else is rarely sudden to the person taking action. Most people react loudly, debate publicly, and move only when attention is unavoidable. He didn't. His decisions were silent, deliberate, and entirely internal. He worked through possibilities alone, weighed consequences in private, and reached conclusions before anyone else even realized a choice needed to be made. By the time the world notices, the moment has passed. The action is already underway, and the only thing left for observers is astonishment. That's why warnings and pleas feel meaningless. They're arriving after the blueprint has been drawn, after the course has been set, after the die has quietly rolled. There's a subtle mastery in making decisions this way. While others are performing anxiety publicly, he is calculating in silence. He doesn't need applause, agreement, or even awareness. The noise of everyone else's opinions doesn't affect the outcome because the choice was finalized before it had a stage. This is why people feel the urge to beg or warn. It's the instinct of realizing too late that control has already slipped from their hands. Timing matters more than volume, and he understood that long before anyone else even acknowledged the situation existed. The world mistakes quiet decisions for indecision, but the truth is the opposite. Silence often signals resolution, not uncertainty. By the time external pressures arrive, he has already faced the inner debate, reconciled the risk, and embraced responsibility. His calm isn't ignorance. It's the residue of preparation and confidence. This approach makes him untouchable in moments of chaos. He doesn't scramble under pressure, doesn't react to the urgency of others, and doesn't second-guess what has already been carefully concluded. Observers see only the result and interpret it however they like, often as luck or audacity. But in reality, his advantage comes from being several steps ahead in his own mind, long before anyone else even noticed the board was set. When people finally rush in with warnings, they're not preventing anything, they're reacting to a choice that has quietly left their grasp. And that is the power of a decision made in solitude, far away from noise, far ahead of panic, and beyond the reach of belated concern. Number 4. He realized most warnings are disguised fear, not wisdom. People rush in with warnings all the time. They speak loudly, insist urgently, and act as though the world will collapse if you don't listen to them. Most of the time, what they're really doing isn't offering insight. It's projecting their own fear. They're terrified of risk, terrified of what they don't control, terrified of change. Their advice wears the mask of wisdom, but underneath, it's anxiety wrapped in urgency. He learned this early, and it changed everything. When someone's panic masquerades as guidance, listening becomes optional, and responding becomes a choice. That's why their begging has no effect on him. He isn't being wise or reckless, he's being detached. He saw clearly that fear can manipulate faster than reason. People assume urgency equals truth, but the loudest voices often carry the heaviest insecurities. By identifying the difference, he avoided getting trapped in other people's emotional chaos. Warnings arrive when someone feels they've lost influence, when their anxiety has finally escalated into action. By the time they speak, it's already irrelevant. That's why he smiles. Not out of arrogance, but because the timing proves he was right to ignore the dramatics. This understanding makes him unshakable. Calm is his weapon. While others are panicking, he doesn't question his path because he knows which voices matter and which are only echoes of fear. He doesn't need reassurance because he's already reconciled with risk. He isn't swayed by the emotional intensity of others, and he doesn't confuse volume for truth. There's also an uncomfortable honesty in this. Most people's warnings are a reflection of themselves, not the situation. By seeing through that, he gains freedom. He moves faster, thinks clearer, and acts without the weight of collective anxiety slowing him down. Their panic proves only that they're behind, that their fear has arrived late, and that their attempt to influence him is already obsolete. Understanding this distinction, that warnings are often fear in disguise, gives him an edge no one else can contest, and it explains why he can simply smile while the world scrambles. Number 5. He outgrew the need to be saved. Most people live in a state of quiet dependence without even realizing it. They hope someone else will step in when things go wrong, silently expect rescue when decisions backfire, and unconsciously measure their actions against the safety net of others' intervention. He didn't. At some point, he stopped waiting for someone to save him, and that shift changed everything. Once the expectation of rescue is removed, urgency, warnings, and pleas lose their grip. You can beg, warn, or advise, but it doesn't matter. He is already self-reliant, already accountable, and already moving forward. Outgrowing the need to be saved isn't about pride or arrogance. It's about accepting full responsibility for one's choices and understanding that safety is a personal construction, not a public guarantee. When someone reaches that point, their focus shifts from reacting to others' fears to executing their own plan with clarity and precision. They no longer hesitate for validation or comfort because they've reconciled with the fact that they and they alone bear the consequences. This freedom makes late warnings powerless. Most people assume that panic can influence someone if delivered forcefully enough. He knows better. The moment for intervention is never the moment someone finally decides to speak. It is the moment before they acted, which he has long passed. By shedding dependence, he transforms urgency into background noise and fear into something he can observe without flinching. There's also a subtle psychological advantage. People who cling to safety nets remain reactive, always calculating whether external voices approve or disapprove. He doesn't live in that loop. He moves first, decides fast, and feels no need to explain himself because he is already accountable to the one person that matters, himself. When others beg or warn him, their words arrive late, echoing over a mind that has long accepted responsibility. The smile he carries isn't mockery, it's confirmation. He doesn't need saving, and the world's panic proves nothing but that he has already outpaced it. Freedom, responsibility, and timing converge, and that is why he is untouchable once he has outgrown the need to be saved. Number 6. He understood timing better than morality. Most people confuse right and wrong with when to act. They think urgency and ethics are always aligned, that the good decision is also the timely one. He knew better. Timing is the silent architect of outcomes. You can be morally correct, but if your action arrives too late, it's irrelevant. By the time people beg or warn, the moment to influence has passed, and the moral argument becomes noise. He didn't move according to approval or expectation. He moved according to the clock only he understood. This understanding creates a power few notice. While everyone else debates what should be done, he calculates when it must be done. There's a difference between being right and being effective, and he learned to favor the latter without sacrificing conscience. People panic because they see consequences in real time. He saw them before they arrived. By acting early, quietly, and deliberately, he shaped events while observers were still discussing the possibilities. That's why their warnings feel redundant. He acted at the point that mattered, not the point they imagined. Timing also strips urgency of influence. People assume that loud concern can redirect someone's path, but he knew that by the time their panic surfaced, the window had closed. He moves in the unseen space, the hidden moment where decisions are born before anyone realizes they exist. In that space, morality doesn't need applause, and influence doesn't need consent. He acts with precision, not for approval, and the world reacts only after the fact. There's a subtle kind of freedom in mastering timing. It allows action without hesitation, confidence without confrontation, and foresight without explanation. He doesn't need to argue ethics in the heat of someone else's panic. He has already aligned his actions with the moment that counts. The smile he wears when people beg or warn is not mockery. It is recognition of his advantage. Understanding when to act better than anyone can argue what is right turns chaos into opportunity, noise into irrelevance, and warnings into echoes of a reality he has already mastered. Timing, more than morality, defines the difference between reaction and command. Number 7. He no longer confuses danger with importance. Most people panic at the sight of danger, assuming that anything risky must also be urgent, meaningful, or worth attention. He doesn't. He learned early that danger and significance are not the same. Just because something is risky doesn't mean it matters. Conversely, the things that truly shape outcomes often appear quiet, subtle, and deceptively safe. Once he understood this, he stopped reacting to fear, disguised as importance, and that changed everything. People beg, plead, and warn when they see danger, but by the time they speak, he's already focused on what actually moves the needle. Their noise is misaligned with reality, and it passes right through him. This clarity gives him an invisible advantage. While others are busy managing risks that feel dramatic, he is quietly prioritizing what truly counts. He doesn't waste energy reacting to spectacle. He doesn't confuse chaos with opportunity or danger with significance. He sees the difference between the storm that matters and the storm that is only loud. This allows him to act calmly, decisively, and effectively in situations where others are still panicking over the wrong things. The moment people start begging, it usually proves their urgency was misplaced, and he already knows it. Understanding the difference between danger and importance also sharpens judgment. People who respond to every perceived threat are trapped in a loop of distraction and anxiety. He escapes that trap because he evaluates each situation not by its emotional weight, but by its actual consequence. Risk doesn't scare him. Only irrelevance does. He moves where impact exists and ignores where panic thrives. The result is a kind of untouchable focus. While the world shouts warnings at every hazard, he is calm, deliberate, and aligned with what truly matters. His smile when others panic isn't arrogance, it's quiet recognition that they are reacting to the wrong things. He has learned to separate the noise from the signal, the danger from the importance, and in that separation lies power, clarity, and an almost untouchable advantage over anyone who confuses fear with necessity. Number 8. He calculated the cost of listening, and it was higher than the cost of ignoring. Most people hear warnings and immediately react, believing that responding is the safest path. They don't realize that every piece of advice carries a hidden price: hesitation, self-doubt, wasted energy, and the quiet erosion of momentum. He saw this early. He realized that listening to every urgent voice, every panicked opinion, often delayed action more than it helped. The cost of giving in to their concern was far higher than the cost of moving forward on his own terms. Once he understood that, he stopped letting external voices dictate his pace. This is why his calm feels unshakable. When people beg or warn, they're essentially asking him to pay a price he has already calculated and rejected. Their urgency is not a nudge toward clarity. It's an added weight on someone who is already carrying the consequences internally. He doesn't ignore recklessly. He ignores strategically, because he knows that some interruptions, however well-intentioned, will cost more than the situation itself. He moves in the space where timing, clarity, and risk intersect, unbothered by the noise of those still negotiating fear. What makes this extraordinary is the subtle discipline it requires. It's easy to dismiss others when you're confident, but it takes intelligence to weigh the true cost of their words against your own path. Every warning, plea, or argument is measured, and only those that provide net benefit earn attention. All the rest are filed as distraction, irrelevant, and powerless. Most people never realize that obeying fear disguised as advice is often more dangerous than ignoring it. By calculating the cost of listening and choosing to act independently, he transforms external pressure into irrelevance. People beg, plead, and warn, but their efforts arrive after the decision has already been made. Their urgency can't influence him because he has already accounted for the risks, reconciled with the consequences, and decided that action outweighs distraction. This balance between awareness and independence is a rare kind of mastery, one that allows him to move freely, decisively, and far ahead of anyone trying to pull him off course. When others scramble, he smiles, because he knows exactly what he is carrying and exactly what he refuses to carry. Number 9. He noticed that urgency usually appears after permission was denied. Most people mistake urgency for foresight. When someone shouts, pleads, or warns, it feels like insight, like a last-minute attempt to prevent disaster. But he learned the hard truth. By the time people panic, the moment to influence has already passed. Their urgency is rarely proactive, it's reactive. It only surfaces after the choice has been made, after the internal yes or no has already been decided. Warnings are not tools of prevention, they are echoes of lost control. He saw this clearly, and it changed how he interacted with the world. This understanding gives him an invisible advantage. While everyone else is scrambling to reclaim influence they never had, he is already moving. Their frantic energy is misaligned, arriving late, desperate, and irrelevant. He doesn't need to justify his actions or negotiate with those who have realized too late that they were never in charge. The very act of panic proves their window of authority has closed. He smiles because he doesn't need permission, and the world's sudden concern only confirms the timing of his choice. The brilliance of this realization lies in its subtlety. Most people don't notice the pattern. Urgency is not an early indicator of danger. It's a delayed response to someone else's independence. Recognizing this frees him from external pressure. He doesn't flinch when voices rise, when alarms sound, or when pleas become desperate. He's already accounted for the consequences, already decided his path, and already moved past the point where intervention matters. By understanding that warnings and urgency are often signals of lost opportunity, not impending disaster, he shifts the power dynamic entirely. People may try to reclaim influence with intensity and volume, but their timing makes them irrelevant. He acts before urgency arrives, and he acts with clarity that panic can never achieve. Their pleas do not derail him because he has internalized the only permission that counts, his own. The world can beg, argue, and warn, but it only confirms the reality he has already embraced. Number 10. He stopped mistaking emotional intensity for truth. Most people believe that the louder someone is, the more right they must be. They assume that panic, passion, or desperation signals correctness, and they react accordingly, often making decisions based on volume rather than substance. He doesn't. He learned early that emotion is rarely a measure of accuracy. People beg, yell, and dramatize because they are scared, impatient, or desperate to influence, not because they possess insight that matters. Recognizing this, he stopped giving weight to emotional intensity and started focusing only on reality, logic, and consequence. This distinction gave him a remarkable advantage. While others are caught in the whirlwind of someone else's fear, he remains grounded, moving with clarity and calm. He doesn't respond to the panic in voices or the trembling of hands. He responds only to facts, to cause and effect, to what truly matters in the long run. This allows him to make decisions in a space free from distraction, where urgency is measured, not dictated by someone else's emotional state. There's also a subtle kind of freedom in this approach. Emotional intensity is exhausting and manipulative. Most people are tethered to it, reacting reflexively to who shouts first or shows the most desperation. By seeing through the theatrics, he unchains himself from external pressure. He doesn't flinch when people beg or warn, because their energy doesn't contain truth. It contains fear, frustration, and regret arriving too late. This mindset transforms warnings from a threat into a confirmation. The louder people get, the more he knows they are reacting, not acting. Their panic proves that he has already accounted for the consequences, that he has already decided, and that their influence is obsolete. He can smile quietly while the world erupts because he understands that truth doesn't raise its voice. It exists silently, deliberately, and unwaveringly, and by learning to separate emotion from reality, he moves faster, smarter, and untouchably ahead of anyone trying to catch up with noise instead of fact. Number 11. He accepted being misjudged as part of the strategy. Most people fear judgment. They adjust, explain, and perform to be seen in a favorable light. They try to control perception because they think misunderstanding is dangerous. He didn't. He realized early that being misjudged isn't a flaw. It's a tool. People interpret his actions through their own fears, biases, and expectations, and he learned to let it happen. Their opinions, Their assumptions and their misinterpretations became irrelevant to his strategy. In fact, the less they understood him, the clearer his advantage grew. This acceptance gives him freedom others rarely experience. While the world judges, debates, and speculates, he acts. He doesn't waste energy clarifying motives or correcting misconceptions. People beg, warn, or react based on what they think is happening, not what is actually happening. And that's exactly the space he occupies, moving, deciding, and executing far ahead of the world's assumptions. Their judgment arrives late, often confused, and always powerless to alter his course. There's a subtle psychological edge in being misjudged. When others misunderstand, they underestimate, they assume limitations, misread intentions, and miscalculate timing. He uses that. He doesn't need approval or recognition because he already owns the only thing that matters: control over his own actions. The chaos of perception becomes irrelevant when the outcome has been quietly decided. Being comfortable with misjudgment also protects him from distraction. Most people stop, reconsider, or hesitate when criticized or doubted. He doesn't. He has reconciled with the fact that perception is a variable beyond his control. By accepting that, he turns misunderstanding into invisibility. No noise, no pressure, no interference, just space to move with precision. When people finally realize what he has done, they scramble to catch up. By then, their opinions and judgments are meaningless. The smile he carries isn't arrogance. It's the quiet acknowledgement that being misjudged was never an obstacle, but a strategic advantage. Acceptance of misunderstanding allows him to operate in a realm where others are forever trying to keep pace, but he has already won the invisible game. Number 12. He knew that if he hesitated now, he'd hesitate forever. Hesitation is a trap most people fall into without realizing it. They wait for perfect timing, absolute certainty, or universal approval, and in that waiting, the moment slips quietly away. He recognized early that hesitation isn't just a temporary pause, it's a slippery slope. Once you allow doubt to linger, it becomes a habit, and every decision after that carries the weight of past uncertainty. He refused to enter that loop. He understood that decisive action in the present isn't just a choice, it's a way to prevent a lifetime of indecision. This awareness gives him an invisible edge. While others debate, overthink, or second-guess, he moves. He doesn't need every reassurance, every agreement, or every signal from the outside world to act. The window for opportunity is rarely as wide as it seems, and he learned that acting boldly, even with incomplete certainty, is far better than waiting for conditions that may never arrive. Hesitation only multiplies cost, risk, and regret. By acting promptly, he neutralizes the paralysis that traps most people. There's also a psychological strength in this approach. People often mistake hesitation for caution, but it's actually a form of fear, disguised as prudence. He stripped that away, confronting the reality that delay rarely protects. It usually amplifies stakes. The sooner a decision is made, the sooner control is regained. Waiting gives influence to the wrong voices, to fear and to circumstance. He refused to surrender that control. This principle also explains why warnings and pleas failed to reach him. By the time urgency arrives, he has already acted. The hesitation that might have let them influence him never existed. He's moved past it, and his path is set. The smile he carries isn't arrogance, it's quiet satisfaction, knowing that the only hesitation he allows is strategic, never reactive. He acts decisively because he understands the dangerous gravity of hesitation. Once you start doubting, you risk doubting forever. Acting now is the only way to ensure freedom, clarity, and momentum, and that knowledge keeps him untouchable while the world scrambles behind him. Number 13. He understood that regret hurts less than resentment. Most people live in constant fear of regret. They delay decisions, hesitate under pressure, and obsess over outcomes, imagining the what-ifs that might follow. What they don't realize is that regret, though uncomfortable, is temporary. It fades with time, reflection, and acceptance. Resentment, on the other hand, lingers, festers, and reshapes behavior in ways that chain people to their own frustration. He understood this distinction intuitively. He chose action over hesitation because he knew that living with regret is easier than living with the slow poison of resentment. This awareness allows him to move without the weight of indecision. People beg, warn, and advise, but he doesn't pause to accommodate them. He knows that hesitating to avoid regret often creates resentment toward those who hesitated too late to influence the outcome. By acting decisively, he maintains control over his path and shields himself from the long-term corrosive effects of bitterness. He doesn't avoid mistakes. He anticipates the discomfort, accepts it, and moves forward. Regret is finite. Resentment is endless. There's also an element of freedom in this mindset. Most people are trapped in the illusion that inaction is safer. He realized that the real danger isn't making the wrong choice. It's letting fear of being wrong stop him from acting at all. Regret can be reconciled, learned from, and even turned into insight. Resentment cannot. It anchors people to the past, keeps them reactive, and blinds them to opportunity. By prioritizing action, he breaks that cycle and positions himself ahead of anyone still wrestling with hesitation. The result is a calm, untouchable confidence. When the world panics, pleads, or warns him, he is unshaken because he has already chosen his path, accepted its potential regrets, and refused to harbor bitterness for anyone's tardy opinions. He smiles not from arrogance, but from the understanding that regret is manageable, temporary, and ultimately inconsequential compared to the heavy, permanent weight of resentment. That clarity, that choice, and that understanding make him untouchable, decisive, and quietly victorious long before anyone else realizes what has happened. Number 14. He smiled because the warning proved his timing was right. Most people panic when they realize they're too late. They raise their voices, wave their hands, and beg for attention, convinced that urgency can still change the outcome. He smiled because he knew it couldn't. The pleas, warnings, and frantic advice arriving now were not a reflection of reality. They were proof of it. By the time anyone finally understood the stakes, he had already moved, decided, and accepted the consequences. Their panic didn't shake him. It confirmed that his timing had been precise, deliberate, and untouchable. That smile isn't arrogance, it's clarity. Timing is a hidden weapon that most people never master. Acting too early can seem reckless, acting too late can seem reactive, but acting exactly when the moment demands it creates results that others can only react to. Their warnings are nothing more than echoes chasing a decision that was made silently, confidently, and in full awareness. He doesn't need to explain or justify himself because the world's delayed reaction proves the correctness of his pace. There's a psychological elegance in this. Most people equate loudness with control, volume with influence, but influence has a quiet side. It's invisible, deliberate, and untouchable. By the time others scramble, he is already ahead, watching their panic arrive like waves on a shore he has long left behind. The late warnings, the desperate advice, the belated attempts to redirect. They all carry only proof that he had moved in the right moment, long before they realized it existed. His calm smile is also a subtle assertion of independence. It signals that he doesn't rely on approval, that he doesn't need others' understanding, and that he doesn't wait for permission. Timing was his ally, foresight his shield, and acceptance his foundation. By the time the world raises its voice, he has already rewritten the rules for himself, and their warnings are merely background noise. The smile captures that invisible victory, the quiet acknowledgement that he acted when it mattered, decisively, confidently, and untouchably, leaving everyone else to arrive too late and wonder how he got there first. In the end, what sets him apart isn't luck, charisma, or even raw intelligence. It's mastery over himself and the moment. He studies consequences before others notice, acts while they debate, and moves silently while panic arrives too late. He doesn't wait to be understood, doesn't mistake emotional intensity for truth, and doesn't hesitate when hesitation could become a trap. He calculates costs, accepts misjudgment, and distinguishes between real importance and mere danger. He embraces responsibility, acts decisively, and understands that regret is fleeting while resentment lasts forever. And when the world finally raises its voice, when warnings come too late, he simply smiles, not with arrogance, but with the quiet certainty that his timing, judgment, and independence were already flawless. Every principle we explored, every subtle advantage he wields, paints the same picture. Control is internal, power is quiet, and true mastery happens long before anyone else is even aware that a choice exists. What looks effortless to the outside observer is the result of discipline, foresight, and a deep understanding of human behavior. He moves through life untouchable, not because he seeks attention, but because he refuses to be swayed by it. His calm in the face of late warnings is a reflection of preparation, clarity, and an unwavering commitment to his own path. If you've been paying attention, the lesson is clear. Timing, awareness, and self-reliance outweigh noise, panic, and belated advice every single time. Learning to act decisively, accept responsibility, and move beyond the need for validation doesn't just change outcomes, it changes everything. If this insight resonated with you, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into human behavior, power, and untouchable strategies. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this video with anyone who needs to understand the hidden rules of timing, influence, and unstoppable action. Stay sharp, stay ahead, and keep mastering your own path. Stay awakened, chosen ones.